found out from social media that my wife went to Hawaii with her lover and lied about everything. Imagine waking up, checking your phone, and discovering the person you trusted most was living a double life. How did I find out? What happened when I confronted her? And how did I finally take control? Stay tuned, because you won't believe what comes next. I never imagined my life would take this kind of turn. It started out so perfect, or at least it seemed that way. For years, I thought I had everything. A thriving career in software engineering, a beautiful modern home nestled in a quiet San Diego suburb, and a wife I adored. Madeline and I had built what felt like the quintessential American dream. We met 6 years ago at a friend's wedding. She caught my eye immediately, with that dazzling smile and infectious laugh. From the first conversation, I was hooked. She had this way of making you feel like you were the most important person in the room. It wasn't just her looks, though she was gorgeous. It was the way she carried herself, confident, elegant, and full of ambition. She ran her own event planning business and thrived in the high-profile world of luxury clients, upscale venues, and exclusive gatherings. It was the kind of success that inspired me, made me proud to be by her side. When we got married, I believed with all my heart that I'd found my partner for life. We shared dreams, supported each other through challenges, and celebrated every milestone together. I worked hard to provide for us, and she poured herself into her business, her energy seemingly endless. At least, that's how it looked on the surface. But over time, something shifted. At first, it was subtle. She started working late more often. Not that I thought much of it, her line of work often meant hosting events that stretched into the evening. But gradually, those work dinners became more frequent. I'd come home after a long day at the office, hoping to unwind with her, only to find a note on the kitchen counter: "Late meeting, don't wait up." When she did come home, she'd be dressed to the nines in a way that seemed excessive, even for her. I started noticing how distant she felt. Like her mind was elsewhere even when we were sitting in the same room. I'd ask about her day, and she'd give me these short, vague answers, as if she was mentally somewhere else. I told myself it was just the natural ebb and flow of a long-term relationship. Maybe the initial spark had faded, but that didn't mean our connection was gone. Relationships evolve, right? People get busy, especially when they're building something big. That's what I kept telling myself. Then came the spending. Madeline had always enjoyed the finer things: designer handbags, spa days, the occasional splurge on a fancy dinner. I never minded. I made a good living, and I wanted her to enjoy the life we had worked so hard to create. But in the past year, her spending had taken on a new life. Designer shopping sprees turned into weekly events. I'd noticed new jewelry, high-end shoes, a wardrobe that could have filled a department store. When I mentioned it, she'd just smile and say, "Oh, it's an investment for the business." Clients expect me to look the part. I wanted to trust her. I wanted to believe that her intentions were good. But every time I glanced at our bank statements, I'd feel a gnawing unease. Flights booked to cities I didn't recall her visiting. Dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants that weren't on any itinerary she'd mentioned. Yet I said nothing. I didn't want to be that husband, the one who accuses without proof, who questions every little thing. After all, she had never given me a concrete reason to doubt her before. I pushed my suspicions aside. But the tension inside me grew. Late nights, unexpected expenses, a vague sense of distance between us, it all added up, though I couldn't put my finger on exactly what was wrong. And then, one unremarkable evening, it all came crashing down. I had just wrapped up a grueling project at work and picked up some takeout on my way home. I dropped onto the couch, ready to relax and catch up on my phone. That's when I saw it. A photo on Instagram: Madeline, standing on a pristine white beach, the sun setting behind her. She looked radiant, dressed in a flowing white dress, holding a cocktail. But it wasn't just her. Beside her stood a tall, well-dressed man, his arm wrapped around her waist. The way they leaned into each other was intimate, unmistakable. They weren't posing for a casual work photo. This was something else entirely. And then my eyes caught the caption: "A new beginning. Engaged #forever together." I froze. My first thought was that it had to be a mistake. Maybe it was an old photo. Something from before we met, taken out of context. Maybe it was staged. She did run events, after all. But no, the timestamp was clear. It was posted today. My heart raced as I scrolled through her feed, hoping for some logical explanation. Some hint that this wasn't what it seemed. But it only got worse. More photos of the two of them, laughing together, holding hands. Pictures of a lavishly decorated table, a romantic dinner under the stars, champagne glasses raised in a toast. My wife was celebrating an engagement. Not with me. I sat there, my mind reeling. This wasn't just an affair. It wasn't a fling or a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a deliberate, planned out, public announcement that she was leaving me. And she hadn't even told me. The betrayal hit like a punch to the gut. But it didn't stop there. As the shock settled in, another realization took its place. Everything they were celebrating. Every luxury, every moment of this dream vacation. It was all on my dime. First-class flights, a 5-star resort, private excursions. It had all been paid for with our shared accounts. My hard-earned money had funded their fantasy life together, and I had been none the wiser. I couldn't breathe. My hands shook as I scrolled through the transactions on our joint bank account, each one confirming my worst fears. She hadn't even tried to hide it. She had used my trust, my resources, my love, and turned it all into a tool for her escape. Sitting there, staring at that screen, I felt a mix of rage, despair, and something else: determination. Madeline had made a mistake. She thought she could play me, thought I'd never find out. But now, the truth was staring me in the face. I didn't know what my next move would be, but I knew one thing for certain: she wasn't going to get away with this. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. At first, I tried to brush it off. Everyone says relationships go through rough patches, right? That after a few years together, things can get a little stale. But this wasn't just the usual wear and tear. It was deeper, more unsettling. There were small moments that seemed off, little things I noticed but didn't want to dwell on. Like the way she started locking her phone screen whenever I walked into the room. Or how she stopped asking me how my day went, as if the routine questions were too much of a chore. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was overthinking. I didn't want to be the paranoid husband, always suspicious, always doubting. But every time I dismissed the nagging voice in the back of my mind, another piece of the puzzle would fall into place. And the picture it formed wasn't a pretty one. It wasn't just the late nights. Those had become more frequent, sure, but Madeline had always had a busy schedule. Her event planning business demanded a lot of her, and I knew that. I respected that. I never wanted to be the guy who held her back from pursuing her goals. But it wasn't just the hours that were bothering me. It was the way she started dressing for these work dinners. She'd always been stylish, but this was something different. Suddenly, she was stepping out in outfits that looked like they belonged on a red carpet rather than a client meeting. And then there was the way she smelled: expensive, luxurious, like she was preparing for a night out at a fancy cocktail bar rather than a professional dinner. I'd kiss her on the cheek as she rushed out the door, and she'd give me that same distracted smile, the one that no longer reached her eyes. "Don't wait up," she'd say. And I didn't. I told myself she was just working hard, making connections, building her empire. I wanted to believe that. But the little things started adding up. It wasn't just the way she looked or acted. It was her phone, always on silent, always face down on the table. She used to leave it lying around, never caring if I picked it up to check the time or scroll through photos. Now, if I reached for it, she'd swoop in like it was her lifeline. She'd laugh it off, say it was just business stuff, nothing interesting. And maybe it was, but it didn't feel that way. And then there were the bank statements. I wasn't one to micromanage her spending. She had her accounts, I had mine, and we had a shared account for household expenses. But lately, that shared account had been seeing some action that didn't quite make sense. Plane tickets booked under her name, to places I'd never heard her mention. Restaurant bills from cities I hadn't been to. Designer handbags and jewelry I never saw her wear. I thought about bringing it up, about asking her if there was something she needed to tell me. But every time I worked up the nerve, I stopped myself. What if I was wrong? What if I was just reading too much into things? I didn't want to start a fight over nothing. One night, after a particularly long day at work, I came home to an empty house. Her car wasn't in the driveway, and there was no note, no text, no explanation. Just silence. I tried calling her, but it went straight to voicemail. I figured she was at another one of those networking events she always mentioned. But when I scrolled through my social media feed, looking for a distraction, I saw a post that stopped me cold. It was a picture of Madeline at a dinner party. Not just any dinner party, one of those lavish, high-profile gatherings she used to dream about. She was glowing, wearing a dress I'd never seen before, sipping champagne. Beside her stood a man, his arm around her waist. They looked cozy. Too cozy. The caption read, "Making memories with my favorite people." I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting. I wanted to believe it was innocent, that this was just a client event, that the guy next to her was a colleague. But something about the way they stood, the way they smiled at each other, didn't feel professional. It felt personal. I didn't confront her right away. I needed more than a single photo. Over the next few days, I paid closer attention. I started checking her social media accounts, something I'd never done before. And the more I looked, the more I found. Pictures of her at luxury resorts, tagging locations I didn't even know she'd visited, posts about new beginnings, and taking life to the next level. There were no direct mentions of me, no we or us. Just me and my journey. It was subtle, but it stung. Each new post felt like another piece of the life she was building without me. And that guy? He kept showing up. In the background of photos, in the comments section, liking every picture she posted. It was hard to ignore. I started piecing it together. The late nights, the extravagant purchases, the cryptic captions, it all pointed to something I didn't want to admit. The woman I had married, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, was living a double life. She was building something new, something that didn't include me. I told myself I needed to stay calm, to not jump to conclusions. But every time she walked out the door in another designer dress, every time I saw her phone light up with a notification she quickly swiped away, I felt that tightness in my chest grow. I tried to act normal, to keep things light when she was home. I'd ask her about her day, pretend not to notice when she gave me one-word answers. But inside, I was on edge. I knew something was coming. I just didn't know when or how it would hit. And then it happened. Late one night, she came home hours after she said she would. Her makeup was perfect, her hair done up in a way that looked like it took hours. She had a sparkle in her eye, the kind she used to have when she was genuinely happy. But this time, it wasn't for me. I wanted to ask where she'd been, who she'd been with. But I didn't. I couldn't bring myself to say the words. Instead, I waited until she went to bed, then opened my laptop and started looking into our finances again. That's when I found the trip. First-class tickets to Hawaii, booked for 2. A 5-star hotel reservation. A private yacht charter. The dates matched up perfectly with one of her work trips. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an accident. She had planned this, paid for it, and kept it hidden from me. That's when the gnawing suspicion turned into certainty. She was cheating. She was lying. She was betraying me in the worst way possible. I wanted to confront her right then and there, to wake her up and demand an explanation. But I didn't. Something stopped me. Maybe it was the fear of what I would hear, or maybe it was the realization that I needed a clear head before I made my next move. Instead, I sat in that dark room, staring at the evidence on my screen, and let the anger and hurt and disbelief wash over me. This wasn't just a rough patch. This wasn't just a phase. This was the moment I knew my life would never be the same. I closed the laptop, took a deep breath, and made a silent vow to myself, whatever came next, I wouldn't let her take me down with her. This is where it all started unraveling. But do you think she owned up to her lies? Or did she try to spin another story? Comment 1 if you think she confessed, comment 2 if you think she made it even worse. I'll tell you exactly what happened after this. I sat at the dining room table, staring at the credit card statements spread out before me. Each one felt like a punch to the gut, a reminder of just how blind I'd been. Madeline's spending had always been on the high side, but it was nothing I couldn't handle. She'd pick up a new designer purse here, a spa day there, normal indulgences for someone who worked in the luxury event industry. At least, that's what I'd told myself. But now, as I traced the long, expensive trail she'd left behind, I realized just how far things had spiraled. My heart pounded as I flipped through each page, watching the numbers add up. Flights to exotic destinations, hotels I'd never even heard her mention, 5-star restaurants where a single meal cost more than our monthly groceries. It was all right there in black and white, and it all pointed to the same devastating truth. She hadn't just been cheating on me emotionally, she'd been siphoning off my hard-earned money to fund her secret life. I felt my throat tighten, my breath quicken. Every dollar she spent, every charge she made, was a blow to the trust I'd given her so freely. My hands trembled as I picked up another statement, scanning the list of transactions. A luxury boutique in Los Angeles, a private wine tasting in Napa, a high-end jewelry store in New York City. Each line was like a breadcrumb, leading me further down a path I didn't want to follow but couldn't ignore. I glanced up, my gaze landing on a framed photo of us hanging on the wall. It had been taken a few years ago, during happier times. We were smiling, arms wrapped around each other, oblivious to the cracks that were forming beneath the surface. I clenched my jaw, the betrayal stinging all over again. How could she have done this? How could she have looked me in the eyes every day, kissed me goodbye in the mornings, and told me she loved me, all while running up charges like this? And why hadn't I seen it sooner? The signs had been there, small but unmistakable. The late nights, the vague answers, the sudden uptick in extravagant purchases. I'd chosen to trust her, to give her the benefit of the doubt. Now, that trust felt like a noose tightening around my neck. I couldn't help but think back to all the times I'd brushed off that nagging voice in the back of my mind. The times I'd told myself it was just the cost of doing business, that she needed to keep up appearances for her clients. But deep down, I knew better. I just hadn't wanted to face it. My chest felt heavy, a dull ache settling in as I stared at the numbers again. Each dollar spent wasn't just money, it was a piece of the life we'd built together. Stolen and repurposed for a life I wasn't a part of. The yacht rental in Bora Bora, the exclusive spa package in the Maldives, the overwater bungalow in French Polynesia. The charges stretched across the globe, a map of all the places she'd gone without me, with someone else. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. The thought of her standing on those beaches, laughing, sipping champagne, living out some fantasy, all while I sat at home working late nights, trying to build a future for us, was almost too much to bear. I pushed the statements aside, feeling a surge of anger. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers. I wanted to look her in the eye, and ask her how she could betray me like this. But what would that accomplish? She'd already made her choices. She'd already decided that her double life was worth more than the life we built together. My hands balled into fists, my nails digging into my palms. I'd been a fool. I'd let her lead me by the nose, all while she drained our accounts and planned her escape. But no more. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I needed to be smart about this. Emotional outbursts wouldn't solve anything. I had to approach this calmly, methodically. She had crossed a line, and it was time to make sure she felt the consequences. I leaned forward, opening my laptop. If she thought I was just going to sit back and let her walk all over me, she was sorely mistaken. I knew I couldn't stop there. Just finding those transactions wasn't enough. I needed more. I needed to understand the full scope of what she'd done, and part of me still hoped, against all logic, that I was wrong. Maybe there was some explanation I hadn't thought of. Some reason why thousands of dollars had been funneled out of our accounts. Why she'd been booking these luxurious trips I had no clue about. So I started digging deeper. I pulled up our financial records and went back months, no, years. The pattern was undeniable. She'd been doing this for a long time, and she hadn't even tried to hide it. Her name was on the plane tickets. Her credit card was linked to the hotel reservations. All the receipts led directly back to her. As the evidence piled up, I felt my pulse quicken, my breath shallow. The scale of it was staggering. This wasn't just a one-time thing, a momentary lapse. This was a calculated, ongoing betrayal. Each new discovery hit me harder than the last. Every charge, every withdrawal, every trip taken without my knowledge felt like another knife in my back. She'd been living a completely separate life, funded by me, while I'd been sitting at home believing we were in this together. The realization made my chest tighten. My temples throbbed. I wanted to yell, to throw something, to break something, anything to release the pressure building inside me. But instead, I just sat there, staring at the screen, a cold determination settling in. I couldn't let her get away with this. Not anymore. I thought about all the times I'd dismissed my instincts, All the moments when my gut had told me something wasn't right. I'd always ignored that feeling, choosing to trust her instead. I had trusted her when she told me the late nights were just networking events. I'd trusted her when she said the expensive jewelry was for professional image. I'd trusted her when she claimed the lavish dinners were necessary to impress clients. And yet, here I was, staring at line after line of transactions that proved it was all a lie. My trust had been nothing more than a blank check for her to cash in on. As I went further back through the records, I started seeing a pattern. It always began the same way: a new client, a must-attend event, some big deal that required a little extra spending. Then came the charges, small at first, then bigger. A few $100s on a new dress. A few thousand on travel expenses. By the end, it was tens of thousands on luxury vacations, private yacht rentals, and 5-star resort packages. All of it carefully framed as business related, all of it slipping right past me, because I wanted to believe the best about her. That realization hurt more than anything. I wasn't just angry at her, I was angry at myself. Angry that I'd been so blind, so naive, so willing to overlook the warning signs. I had let this happen. I had given her that power over me. And now I was paying the price. But as much as it hurt, that anger fueled me. It gave me the drive to keep going, to keep uncovering the truth. I went through every bank statement, every credit card bill, every receipt I could find. I started making notes, documenting every expense. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with the information yet, but I knew I needed it. If nothing else, I needed to see the full extent of her betrayal. I needed to confront her with cold, hard facts, to lay it all out in black and white. So there would be no room for denial. No way for her to spin this into something innocent. It was like piecing together a puzzle, one I didn't want to solve, but couldn't ignore. The more I found, the clearer the picture became, and the more I realized just how little I truly knew about the woman I had married. I thought back to our wedding day, to the vows we'd exchanged, to the promises we'd made. I'd believed her when she said she would love me forever. I'd believed her when she said she wanted to build a life together. But now, as I stared at the evidence on my laptop, those words felt hollow, meaningless. She hadn't just broken my trust, she'd shattered it, ground it into dust, and then had the audacity to keep smiling at me every day as if nothing was wrong. That betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, to make her see what she'd done. But I knew I had to be smart about this. I couldn't just go off half-cocked, shouting accusations without a plan. I needed to stay calm, keep my head clear. I needed to wait for the right moment, the right opportunity. She had been calculating in her actions, and now I had to be just as calculated in mine. I had to find a way to turn this situation around, to take back control, to make sure she felt the full weight of what she'd done. And no matter what, I wasn't going to let her walk away unscathed. After piecing together months' worth of transactions, receipts, and invoices, I finally had a clear picture of the depth of her deceit. It wasn't just one or two splurges here and there. This was systemic. She'd been funneling money out of our joint accounts and racking up charges on our credit cards for years. And the thing was, it was all so obvious once I laid it out in front of me. There were plane tickets to places she'd never mentioned, lavish hotel stays I'd never heard about, expensive dinners for two at some of the finest restaurants on the West Coast. None of it made sense in the context of our life together. While I was at home working late, covering deadlines, and putting in extra hours to ensure we had a stable future, she was off gallivanting with God knows who, living a lifestyle that she never even tried to share with me. I stared at the spreadsheet I'd made, each line item more damning than the last. It all felt so cold, so calculating. Every transaction told the same story. She didn't just lie, she planned this. She thought she could pull this off forever. The more I looked, the angrier I got. And the more the anger festered, the more I realized that anger wasn't enough. I needed to do something about it. She thought I was too clueless to figure it out. She thought I'd keep looking the other way, convincing myself that all the extra spending was just the cost of supporting her career, her image, her dreams. Well, I wasn't going to let her keep dreaming at my expense. I started taking notes, marking the exact amounts, the exact dates, and the exact items she'd purchased. I didn't just want a general sense of what she'd done. I wanted concrete proof. I wanted to have everything in my hand. so that when the time came when she tried to deny it, or spin it into something innocent, I could shut her down with facts. Cold, hard facts. This was no longer just about uncovering the truth. This was about making sure she couldn't talk her way out of it. I also began looking into the accounts she had opened in her own name. She had insisted on having separate credit cards for her business, claiming that it would make bookkeeping easier. I never questioned it. Why would I? She'd always been so confident, so sure of herself. But now I was beginning to wonder if that confidence was just part of the act. As I delved deeper, I found more charges, more trips, more extravagant purchases, all paid for with what she claimed were business funds. Yet, those same business accounts had never shown a profit. In fact, they were consistently in the red. She wasn't just lying to me, she was lying to her clients, her investors, her vendors. And it all came back to one simple fact. She was using me as her safety net. Every time her accounts came up short, every time she couldn't cover her own expenses, she'd dip into our shared resources to keep the illusion alive. She was gambling with our future, and I had been too trusting to see it. It became clear that this wasn't just a personal betrayal, it was a financial and professional one too. She had crossed lines I didn't even know existed. I found emails and invoices that didn't match up with the payments she was making. I saw inflated charges, double-billed clients, and money that should have gone toward business expenses mysteriously vanishing. At first, I thought maybe I was misunderstanding, that perhaps there was a legitimate explanation. But the more I uncovered, the more obvious it became that she was cooking the books. She wasn't running a business, she was running a scam. And all the while, she was using me as her fallback, her safety cushion, her unwitting accomplice. That realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I wasn't just the guy she cheated on, I was the guy she relied on to clean up her messes. And now, with the evidence in front of me, I wasn't just angry, I was determined. She had taken advantage of my trust, my hard work, and my belief in her dreams. She had turned me into a silent partner in her scheme without my consent. And worst of all, she'd done it all with a smile, convincing me that we were a team, that we were building something together. Now, as I stared at the mountain of proof I'd gathered, I knew that whatever came next, I had to make sure she paid for what she'd done. She wasn't going to walk away from this without consequences. When I finally had all the pieces in place, the full scope of her deception laid bare, I felt a strange calm settle over me. It wasn't the kind of peace that comes from forgiveness or understanding. No, it was something colder, sharper clarity. Madeline had built a house of cards out of my trust, and now it was my turn to blow it down. I stared at the documents spread out on the kitchen table, each one a carefully curated breadcrumb leading to the same undeniable conclusion. She had used me, lied to me, and betrayed me on every level. I could feel the weight of it all pressing down on my chest, but there was no more room for doubt or second guessing. The anger that had been simmering beneath the surface was gone, replaced by a calculated determination. I wasn't just going to confront her, I was going to dismantle the entire charade she had created, piece by piece. First, I froze our joint accounts. It was a simple move, one I should have made weeks ago, but now that I had the evidence, it felt right. She wouldn't be able to touch another dime of my money. Then I called my bank and canceled the credit cards in my name. Every card she had ever sweet-talked me into giving her access to was now cut off. I watched the notifications roll in, as one transaction after another was declined: spa packages, luxury boutiques, even a 5-star dinner she must have scheduled for that evening. The thought of her standing at a counter somewhere, confused and then furious as her card was rejected, gave me a small, bitter sense of satisfaction. This was just the beginning. I moved on to the accounts tied to her so-called business. She had insisted for years that she needed her own credit lines to maintain her professional independence. In hindsight, that should have been a red flag, but at the time, I thought I was being supportive. Now I saw it for what it was, a way for her to keep her schemes out of my sight. I gathered every document I could find: bank statements, invoices, expense reports, and started compiling a detailed record of her activities. The more I uncovered, the more obvious it became that her event planning business was nothing more than a front. She wasn't generating income, she was burning through money, my money, and trying to cover it up with creative bookkeeping. I found emails from clients demanding refunds, invoices that didn't match the payments she claimed to have made, and even correspondence with vendors hinting at legal action. It was a house of cards, all right, and she'd been hoping I'd never see the foundation crumbling underneath. But I saw it now, all of it. I printed out the most damning evidence and put it in a folder. I didn't know if I'd ever actually use it, but having it there gave me a strange sense of control. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't the one being played. I was the one holding the cards. I knew that when she came home, she'd be confused at first. Maybe she'd laugh it off, tell me it was all a misunderstanding. She'd put on that charming smile, the one that had worked on me so many times before. But this time, I was ready. This time, she wouldn't talk her way out of it. I'd let her think she still had the upper hand, that I was just the clueless husband who'd never question her. And then I'd lay it all out in front of her, every charge, every lie, every betrayal. She wouldn't have anywhere to hide. I rehearsed the conversation in my head, imagining how she'd react. Would she deny it all? Would she break down and cry? Would she try to turn the blame back on me? I didn't know. And honestly, I didn't care. I was done trying to understand her motives. All that mattered now was making sure she couldn't keep taking advantage of me. I thought about what I'd say, how I'd start. I know everything felt too dramatic, but it was the truth. I knew where the money had gone. I knew who she'd spent it with. I knew that the person I thought I'd married never really existed. The woman I'd shared my life with was just a carefully constructed facade, and now the mask was coming off. By the time she walked through the door that night, I was ready. I had the folder on the table, the evidence spread out like a case file. She barely glanced at it at first, too busy kicking off her heels and pulling out her phone. "Long day," she said, tossing her bag onto the counter. "I could use a drink. Want to pour me one?" Her voice was casual, breezy, as if she hadn't just spent thousands of dollars on God knows what. As if our lives weren't about to change forever. I stayed seated, my hands resting on the folder. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady, controlled. She looked up then, her expression shifting. "What's wrong?" she asked, feigning concern. I could see the gears turning in her head, the flicker of worry behind her eyes. She knew something was off, but she had no idea just how much I knew. I didn't answer right away. I waited, letting the silence stretch. And then, slowly, I slid the folder across the table. "What's this?" she asked, reaching for it with that same practiced smile. I watched her face as she flipped through the pages. The color drained from her cheeks, her mouth opening slightly as she took in the evidence. She looked up at me, her eyes wide. "I can explain," she started, her voice shaking just enough to betray her usual confidence. I held up a hand to stop her. "Don't," I said. "Just don't." She closed her mouth, her hands trembling as she set the folder down. I could see her struggling to come up with a story, an excuse, anything to make this go away. But there was nothing she could say. The proof was right there. I knew everything, and now, so did she. I leaned back in my chair, my gaze never leaving hers. "It's over, Madeline," I said quietly, the weight of those words settling between us. She didn't respond, didn't move. For the first time in years, she looked completely powerless. And for the first time in years, I felt completely free. When I finally confronted her, I thought I'd feel relieved. I thought I'd feel stronger, more in control. Instead, as I watched her face shift from confusion to shock, then to the same careful, measured mask she always wore when she was caught off guard, I felt something else entirely: disappointment. Not just in her, but in myself. I had spent years believing in a version of her that never existed. I had convinced myself she was my partner, my equal, the person I could trust with my dreams and fears. But now, as I sat across from her in our kitchen, the folder of evidence between us, I realized I'd been trusting a stranger. Her voice wavered as she tried to explain. "It's not what it looks like," she started, her hands clutching the edge of the table. "I can explain everything." I didn't respond. I just sat there, my jaw tight, my fists clenched beneath the table. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of hearing me say how or why. I wanted her to keep talking, to dig herself deeper. And she did. "The money. It was all for work," she said, her voice shaky but steady enough to sound rehearsed. "I had these high-profile clients, and they expected a certain level of presentation. The trips, the dinners, The jewelry, it was all part of building a brand. You know how competitive my industry is. I had to keep up appearances. Her words hung in the air, hollow and meaningless. I watched her closely, noting how her eyes darted from the folder to me and back again. She was gauging my reaction, looking for a crack, for some hint that I might believe her. But there was nothing left to believe. So you're saying the trips to Bora Bora were for clients? I finally asked, my voice low and cold. She nodded quickly, too quickly. Yes, exactly, she said. They're not just clients. They're potential investors. I was setting the stage for a big deal that could have changed everything for us. For us. She had the audacity to say it was for us, as if I hadn't seen the photos, hadn't read the receipts, hadn't pieced it all together. And the guy in the pictures? I asked, my gaze never leaving hers. Is he a client too? That question stopped her mid-breath. For the first time, her mask cracked, her lips parted, but no words came out. I could see her scrambling, trying to decide if she should double down or backtrack. Finally, she let out a nervous laugh. That's not what you think. He's a colleague. We were networking. Networking. I felt a bitter laugh rise in my chest, but I swallowed it down. Networking, I repeated, my voice flat. So, you flew first class to Hawaii, stayed in a 5-star resort, and chartered a yacht to network? She nodded, but her hands trembled. Yes, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It was all business. I leaned back in my chair, my arms crossed. If that's true, then you shouldn't mind if I call him, I said, pulling out my phone. Her eyes widened, her breath catching. No, wait, she stammered. That's not necessary. I can explain. I held up a hand. You've already explained. I just want to verify your story. I started typing his name into my contacts, even though I knew I wouldn't find him there. I wanted to see how far she'd go to stop me. Cameron, please, she said, her voice breaking. I'm sorry, okay? I made mistakes. I got in over my head. I didn't know how to fix it. So I just kept going. For a moment, I almost believed her. Almost. The tears in her eyes, the tremble in her voice, it all felt real. But then I remembered the months of lies, the years of deception. She wasn't crying because she was sorry. She was crying because she got caught. I set my phone down slowly, my gaze locking onto hers. You didn't just make mistakes, I said, my voice steady and cold. You made choices. You chose to lie to me, to steal from me, to cheat on me. You didn't get in over your head. You knew exactly what you were doing. She broke down then, her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. I don't know what to say, she sobbed. I never meant to hurt you. I never wanted to ruin everything. I watched her cry, but I felt nothing. The woman in front of me wasn't the woman I'd married. She was someone else entirely. Someone I couldn't forgive. I stood up, the chair scraping against the floor. Save it, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I don't need your apologies. I don't need your explanations. I'm done. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her there at the table, surrounded by the wreckage of her lies. In that moment, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious. I felt empty. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, my future, it was all gone. But at least now I had clarity. At least now I could see her for who she really was. And I knew that whatever happened next, it wouldn't involve her. I stood there, staring at the closed door, listening to the muffled sounds of her crying from the other side. For a brief moment, I wondered if I should go back in, if there was anything left to say. But what would I even say? That I believed her? That I'd forgive her? No. I couldn't. Not after everything she had done. Not after every lie, every moment she had taken advantage of my trust. The weight of it all sat heavy in my chest as I leaned against the wall, my arms crossed. The hallway was silent, save for the faint hum of the fridge in the kitchen. It was a stark contrast to the storm raging inside my head. I felt like a fool for letting things get this far, for not seeing the truth sooner. But more than that, I felt the sharp sting of betrayal. It wasn't just the money or the trips. It was knowing that she had spent years looking me in the eye, kissing me goodbye, and whispering I love you while living a life I knew nothing about. I walked down the hallway toward our bedroom, my footsteps slow and deliberate. Every step felt like it was carrying me further away from the life I thought I had. I pushed open the door, the familiar smell of her perfume lingering in the air. The room looked the same as it always did, tidy, organized, the bed made with hospital corners like she liked. But it didn't feel the same. It felt cold, hollow, like all the warmth had been sucked out of it. I crossed to my side of the bed and sat down heavily, running a hand over my face. How did we end up here? How did she manage to keep all of this hidden for so long? I thought about the early days of our marriage, when we used to spend hours talking about our dreams, our plans, our future. I thought about the vacations we'd taken, the little inside jokes we'd shared, the nights we stayed up late laughing until our sides hurt. It all felt like another lifetime, like it had happened to two different people. I reached for the lamp on the nightstand and turned it on, the soft glow filling the room. My eyes landed on a photo of us sitting on the shelf. It was taken during our first trip to Napa. We were sitting on a picnic blanket, a bottle of wine between us, her head resting on my shoulder. I remember thinking that day how lucky I was to have found someone like her. Someone who made me laugh, who challenged me, who made me want to be a better man. And now, as I looked at her smiling face, all I could feel was a deep, aching loss. The woman in that photo wasn't the woman I knew now. That woman didn't exist anymore. Maybe she never had. I leaned back against the headboard, the cool wood pressing into my back, and closed my eyes. The silence stretched out, heavy and oppressive. I knew I needed to make a decision. I couldn't just sit here forever, dwelling on what had happened. I had to decide what came next, how to move forward. But the thought of starting over, of rebuilding my life without her, was daunting. Where would I even begin? Who was I without her? She had been such a big part of my life for so long that I wasn't sure. I knew how to be me without her. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, staring down into the unknown. I could either stay where I was, clinging to what little was left, or I could take the leap and hope for something better. But the longer I sat there, the more I realized I couldn't stay. I couldn't keep pretending that things could go back to the way they were. They couldn't. The trust was gone, the foundation cracked beyond repair. I opened my eyes and looked around the room one last time. The shelves filled with her books, the closet with her clothes, the bathroom counter with her skincare products. It all felt so familiar, yet so foreign. This wasn't my home anymore. This wasn't my life. It was time to let go. Time to walk away. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I couldn't stay here. Not with her. Not after what she had done. I stood up, my movements slow but steady, and started packing my things. One suitcase, a few essentials. The rest could wait. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay here. I needed space, a fresh start, a chance to figure out who I was without her. And maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to move on. I've always believed that time would give me clarity, that after the shock wore off, I'd be able to make sense of everything. But even as the days stretched into weeks, the betrayal still felt raw. I left that night, a single suitcase in hand, not knowing where I'd end up. I drove aimlessly for a while, the city lights blurring as I tried to wrap my head around the fact that my marriage, my life had unraveled so completely. It wasn't just the infidelity. It wasn't even the money. It was the realization that the person I'd shared my life with, the woman I'd loved without hesitation, had been a stranger all along. That's the part I couldn't shake, no matter how much distance I put between us. I spent the first few nights at a cheap motel on the edge of town, the kind of place where no one asks questions and everyone looks away. I needed time to think, to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, not the smiling, carefree Madeline from the early days of our relationship, but the cold, calculating woman I'd confronted in our kitchen. I could still hear her voice, the excuses she'd tried to spin, the tears that seemed more for her own loss than for what she'd done to me. I kept replaying our conversation, wondering if I'd missed something, some small detail that would explain how things had gone so wrong. But there was no explanation that made sense. No justification that could undo the damage. The truth was simple: she'd chosen herself over us, time and time again. I had thought that leaving would bring some relief, that getting away from her would make it easier to breathe. And in some ways, it did. I didn't have to see her anymore, didn't have to endure the weight of her lies every time I looked at her. But the emptiness followed me. It crept into every quiet moment, every late night when the world seemed to stop and all I had were my thoughts. I started going through old photos, scrolling through years of memories we'd shared. Vacations, anniversaries, lazy Sunday mornings spent laughing over pancakes, each picture felt like a knife to the heart. Those moments had felt so real at the time, so full of love and promise. Now, they felt like a cruel joke, a reminder of how completely I'd been fooled. Eventually, I had to stop looking back. I told myself that the only way forward was to let go of the past, to accept that what I thought we had was gone. I started focusing on practical matters, closing joint accounts, untangling our finances, talking to lawyers. The process was slow, frustrating, and often painful. Every document I signed felt like another step away from the life I'd spent years building. But it also felt like taking control, like reclaiming some small piece of my dignity. I made it a point to stay civil, to keep things as clean as possible. I didn't want to stoop to her level. I wanted to move on with my head held high. Of course, Madeline didn't make it easy. She called me constantly, left messages that alternated between desperate pleas and angry accusations. Some days, she'd beg me to come home, claiming she was sorry and that she wanted to fix things. Other days, she'd lash out, accusing me of overreacting, of being cold and unfeeling. At first, I listened. I let her words wash over me, hoping to find some truth in them. But the more she talked, the more I realized she wasn't apologizing for what she'd done, she was apologizing for getting caught. She wasn't sorry that she'd lied, or that she'd betrayed me. She was sorry that her carefully constructed house of cards had come crashing down. I stopped answering her calls. I stopped reading her messages. I stopped giving her the chance to pull me back into her web. Instead, I focused on myself. I started going to the gym again, something I hadn't done in years. I threw myself into work, taking on new projects, staying late at the office, anything to keep my mind occupied. I reconnected with old friends, people I'd lost touch with during the years I spent wrapped up in my marriage. At first, it felt strange, like I was trying to build a new life from scratch. But slowly, it started to feel right. I began to remember who I was before Madeline, before all the lies and deceit. I wasn't the broken, defeated man she'd left behind. I was still me, strong, capable, and deserving of something better. One day, I got a letter in the mail from her lawyer. It was nothing unexpected, just paperwork about the division of assets, the final steps in dissolving our marriage. I read through it carefully, making sure there were no surprises, no hidden traps. And then, as I signed the last page, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Closure. This was it. This was the end of that chapter, the final break from the life I'd shared with her. I didn't feel triumphant or vindicated. I didn't feel sad or nostalgic. I just felt free. For the first time in years, I wasn't tied to her lies, her manipulations, her betrayals. I was finally free to move forward, to start over, to build a life that was honest and real. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if I'll ever trust someone the way I trusted her, or if I'll ever love someone the way I thought I loved her. But I do know that I've learned something valuable. I've learned that trust isn't something you give blindly, and love isn't something you take for granted. I've learned that the people closest to you can sometimes be the ones who hurt you the most, and that the only way to protect yourself is to listen to your instincts, to pay attention to the signs, and to stand up for yourself when things don't feel right. Madeline's betrayal was the hardest thing I've ever faced. It broke me down in ways I didn't think were possible. But it also forced me to grow, to look at myself and ask the hard questions. Who am I without her? What do I want for my future? What kind of person do I want to be? The answers aren't always clear, and some days are harder than others. But every day, I take another step forward. Every day, I get a little stronger, a little more sure of myself. In the end, I've come to realize that she didn't destroy me. She may have broken my trust, shaken my foundation, and turned my life upside down. But she didn't destroy me. I'm still here, still standing, still fighting to create something meaningful out of the ashes. And for that, I'm proud. I'm proud of the man I've become, and I'm hopeful for the man I'm still becoming. Madeline is my past, but I'm determined to make sure she doesn't define my future. It all came crashing down. The lies, the deception, The life she thought she could live without consequences gone. But the real question is, what would you have done? How would you have handled it? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to hear more stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Because trust me, there's a lot more to come. Trust is earned, not given blindly. I learned the hard way that even the closest people can betray you. So never ignore the red flags. Keep an eye on your finances, question unusual spending, and listen to your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. Love doesn't mean sacrificing your self-respect or stability. Protect yourself, be vigilant, and know your worth. Don't let anyone take advantage of your kindness. In America, we value hard work and honesty. So remember, true relationships are built on trust and mutual respect. Stand firm, and never let betrayal define you.